Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time we're going deep into a pretty heavy topic, anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We're going to be using excerpts from Alfred Rosenberg's book, The Track of the Jew Through the Ages,
Right.
which was, I guess you could say, one of the foundational texts for Nazi ideology.
Absolutely cortex.
So this is not going to be a fun one.
No, not lighthearted.
But I think it's important to look at this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, understanding this book is really important.
Yeah.
Not because its arguments are valid, they're really not,
Right.
but because it's such a chillingly effective form of propaganda.
Yeah, and this is something that we see over and over again throughout history.
Right.
Is this use of propaganda to really,
To demonize.
demonize and dehumanize.
Absolutely.
And it had very real consequences.
Devastating consequences.
So let's take a look and break it down.
Okay.
And I guess our mission here is to understand how Rosenberg constructs his arguments. Because this isn't just something that was happening in the 1930s.
It's much broader than that.
There are echoes of this stuff that we see today.
Oh, absolutely. Patterns that persist.
Right, so one of the central claims that Rosenberg makes in this book
Okay.
is that there's this inherent drive within Jewish people for greed and world domination,
Right.
posing a threat to other cultures.
Yeah, it's the classic us versus them narrative.
Right.
And to try and support this claim, he tries to construct this historical narrative.
Yeah, he's pulling from history,
Right.
but twisting it to fit his narrative.
Absolutely distorting interpretations.
Like, for instance, he takes quotes from the Talmud about the benefits of trade over farming and tries to use that to paint this picture of Jewish people as, like, solely focus on financial gain.
It's that age-old stereotype, the greedy Jewish merchant.
Right.
A stereotype that's been used for centuries to justify discrimination.
And violence. It's really incredible
It is.
how this stereotype, despite being demonstrably false, has such staying power.
Yeah, it's like a virus mutating and adapting over time.
So in Rosenberg's hands, the existence of Jewish merchants in ancient Rome or Alexandria becomes proof of some long-standing conspiracy to control the world's finances.
Right. He completely ignores the historical context.
Yeah.
The fact that Jewish communities were often forced into these specific economic roles.
Yeah, because of discrimination.
Exactly. Due to legal restrictions or social pressures.
Right.
He's flipping cause and effect, making the victims of discrimination look like the perpetrators.
So he's twisted history to fit his narrative.
Exactly.
Then he moves on to attacking Jewish religious beliefs, focusing on passages from the Talmud that critique Christianity.
And this is where we see how dangerous his propaganda can be.
Yeah.
He takes those passages completely out of context and ignores the vast majority of the Talmud that emphasizes compassion and ethical behavior. So he's using selective evidence to portray Jewish people as inherently hateful and intolerant to justify further persecution.
Well, he goes so far as to cite the Toledat Yeshu, which is a medieval text that's actually anti-Christian, as proof of Jewish hatred for Jesus.
Right, a blatant misrepresentation.
Talk about missing the point.
It's a classic example of how propaganda twists information to fit an agenda.
Right.
It's all about appealing to people's existing prejudices and inflaming their fears.
Yeah, he's really good at that fear-mongering.
He knows how to exploit those anxieties.
And then he doesn't even stop there.
Oh no, he keeps going?
He tries to connect Jewish influence to the rise of Freemasonry.
Right.
Bringing in figures like Karl Marx.
It's all part of this grand conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it's supposed to explain all of world history.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how he blends together real historical figures and events with complete fabrications.
It's very clever how he does that.
He takes this idea of a shadowy, secretive group, the Freemasons, and then implies that they're somehow controlled by this even more shadowy and powerful Jewish cabal.
It plays into these deep-seated anxieties about who's really in control.
Yeah, and it's like he's creating this alternate reality where everything is connected. And at the center of it all is this grand Jewish conspiracy pulling the strings.
It's a powerful narrative.
And what's scary is how these types of conspiracy theories are still circulating today.
Absolutely. They find new life online in extremist groups. And even popping up in mainstream political discourse.
So understanding how they're constructed, how they use selective evidence and emotional manipulation is crucial to combating them.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so he's distorted history,
Right.
attacked religious beliefs, And thrown in some conspiracy theories for good measure.
He's covering all his bases.
Where does he go next?
Well, he dives into what he calls the Jewish mind, arguing that it's fundamentally incapable of genuine creativity and originality.
So it's not just attacking Jewish people.
Okay.
He's trying to erase their entire cultural contribution.
Exactly.
Like their art, their ideas.
Their very humanity.
Wow.
It's about denying their capacity for intellectual and artistic achievement.
He even goes so far as to dismiss Max Liebermann,
Right.
who was a highly celebrated painter,
Yes, a prominent figure.
as a mere peddler of French art.
It's a classic tactic of propaganda.
Yeah.
Reducing individuals to stereotypes
Right.
and dismissing their achievements.
All right.
It's all about creating this narrative of inferiority to justify exclusion and ultimately violence.
So we've got this masterclass in propaganda unfolding here.
Absolutely.
Rosenberg's twisted history, his attacks on Jewish culture, it all points to something really sinister lurking beneath the surface.
And it's important to remember that this isn't just some historical curiosity.
No.
These same tropes and accusations are still prevalent today.
Yeah, they're finding new platforms and new audiences.
Yeah.
So understanding how this kind of rhetoric works, how it appeals to fear and prejudice, is crucial to combating it in the 21st century.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, so Rosenberg has laid out his twisted interpretation of Jewish history and culture.
Yeah.
What's next on his agenda? What does he see as the solution to this supposed Jewish problem?
Well, in the next section of his book, he lays out his vision for a racially pure German society, one that's been cleansed of all Jewish influence.
Wait, is he actually advocating for the removal of Jewish people from Germany?
He is, and this is where things take a particularly dark turn.
Oh, wow. I'm starting to see how this book, despite being published almost a century ago, became a blueprint for the horrors that were to come.
It's a chilling reminder that ideas have consequences, and seemingly abstract theories can have devastating real-world impacts.
So it's not just about understanding the past.
No, it's about learning from it.
It's about recognizing the patterns.
Yes.
And being vigilant against these dangerous ideologies wherever they might appear.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
I feel like we've opened up a Pandora's box here.
Maybe we have.
But sometimes you have to confront the darkness to understand the light.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And by shining a light on these hateful ideologies, we can better understand how they operate and how to combat them.
Okay, so we've taken a look at how Rosenberg constructs his arguments in part 1.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface.
We're going to continue this discussion in part 2.
Absolutely. There's so much more to uncover.
Join us then.
Rosenberg goes beyond just these broad pronouncements about Jewish culture.
Okay.
He delves into specific practices, twisting them to fit his hateful narrative.
Okay.
Like, for instance, he targets kosher slaughtering,
Okay.
portraying it as this, barbaric practice compared to European practices.
Yeah, so he's really trying to,
Yeah,
evoke disgust, a visceral reaction from his readers.
exactly. He's trying to make people feel revulsion towards Jewish people.
Right. It's not just about the ideas.
No.
It's about creating this, gut feeling of, oh, these people are different.
Yeah, he's trying to paint a picture of Jewish people as fundamentally different, even alien.
It's dehumanization.
It is a tactic of dehumanization,
Yeah.
making it easier to justify discrimination and violence.
And it doesn't stop at cultural practices.
Right.
He attacks the core of the Jewish faith,
Yeah.
arguing that Judaism is inherently legalistic and materialistic.
And of course, he contrasts this with his idealized vision of Christianity,
Right.
which he presents as the epitome of spiritual depth and moral purity.
So he's creating this,
Right.
false dichotomy,
Yeah.
right? Pitting one religion against the other.
It's a dangerous game to play.
Especially considering the long history of religious persecution in Europe.
Absolutely. This type of rhetoric has been used for centuries to justify violence and discrimination against religious minorities.
It's all about creating this sense of us versus them,
Right.
where the other is seen as a threat.
A threat to our way of life.
Yeah. And it's such a familiar pattern, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it is.
We've seen it play out time and time again throughout history.
We have.
And it seems like Rosenberg isn't just content with attacking religion and culture.
No.
He goes after the realm of finance as well.
Of course, he invokes that age-old stereotype of the Jewish banker,
Right.
claiming that Jewish involvement in finance is proof of their greed and desire for control.
It's just so convenient that he forgets the historical context.
Conveniently ignore
The
this.
fact that Jewish people were often excluded from other professions
Right.
and were forced into roles like moneylending.
Exactly. He twists their circumstances to fit his narrative of inherent wickedness.
It's like any Jewish person who achieves any sort of success in finance must be part of some sinister conspiracy.
It's like he can't conceive of a Jewish person acting ethically or for the common good.
Yeah, so he paints them as inherently untrustworthy.
Right.
Driven solely by profit and a lust for power.
And this kind of thinking is incredibly dangerous.
It is, because it just reinforces those existing prejudices.
It makes it easier to justify discrimination and violence.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we all have a responsibility to challenge these stereotypes whenever we encounter them.
Absolutely.
Whether it's in casual conversation or in more formal settings.
Silence in the face of prejudice is complicity.
I agree. Now, Rosenberg doesn't limit his attacks to specific areas like finance or religion.
No, he goes even further.
He attempts to define a Jewish mentality,
Right.
which he claims is fundamentally incompatible with European values.
It's such a vague and subjective concept.
It is. What does he even mean by Jewish mentality?
Well, he uses it to encompass a range of negative stereotypes.
Okay.
He portrays Jewish people as cunning, deceptive, materialistic, obsessed with power.
So basically,
Yeah.
any negative trait imaginable,
Right.
he attributes it to an entire group of people.
Based solely on their religious and cultural background.
It's dehumanizing.
It is.
And dangerous.
It's reducing individuals to caricatures and denying their inherent dignity and complexity.
Yeah, and that's one of the most insidious aspects of propaganda.
It's,
That it simplifies these complex issues.
right.
And reduces people to stereotypes, making it easier to justify prejudice and discrimination.
It's a dangerous game he's playing.
It is a reminder that we need to be constantly vigilant,
Yes.
challenging our own assumptions and biases,
Absolutely.
and actively seeking out diverse perspectives.
I couldn't agree more. Now, it's important to remember that Rosenberg wasn't just some random bigot spouting off hateful opinions.
Right.
He was a leading intellectual figure within the Nazi Party.
Oh, wow.
And his book was a key piece of propaganda used to justify their policies of persecution and genocide.
Oh, wow. So we're not just talking about abstract ideas here.
No, we're not.
These words had a direct impact on the lives of millions of people.
They did.
It's a sobering reminder that ideas have consequences,
They do.
and that we all have a responsibility to challenge hateful ideologies whenever and wherever they appear.
I couldn't agree more, and it's important to note that the ideas that Rosenberg promoted didn't just disappear with the fall of the Nazi regime.
Oh.
They're still alive and well in certain corners of the internet, in extremist groups, and even in more mainstream political discourse.
Wow. So how do we combat these ideas today?
Well, education is key.
Okay.
We need to understand the history of anti-Semitism,
Yeah.
how it's been used to justify hate and violence,
Right.
and how it continues to manifest in the world today.
So reading books like Rosenberg's,
Yes,
even though it's incredibly disturbing,
it is.
can actually be a valuable learning experience.
It allows us to analyze the arguments and tactics used to promote hate.
To see how seemingly innocuous stereotypes and generalizations can be twisted to justify horrific acts.
Exactly.
It's like taking apart a bomb
Yes,
to understand how it works so we can prevent it from detonating.
I like that analogy.
We need to be able to recognize these dangerous patterns of thought
Right.
and expose them for what they are.
It's not just about understanding the past.
No.
We also need to be aware of how these ideas are being used in the present.
How so?
Well, we see anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories circulating online all the time,
Oh, yeah.
often disguised as legitimate news or political commentary.
Like it's real.
They target Jewish individuals and institutions, accusing them of controlling the media, the banks, or even the government.
It's that same age-old narrative of Jewish power and manipulation that we see in Rosenberg's book.
Exactly. It's just found a new platform in the digital age.
Yeah, so it's not just about education, it's about media literacy as well.
We need to be critical consumers of information,
Right.
questioning sources, and being aware of how rhetoric can be used to mislead and manipulate.
It's like we're all detectives,
Yeah.
trying to sift through the evidence and separate truth from fiction.
It can be challenging.
It can, especially in this fast-paced world of online information.
It is, but the stakes are high.
They are.
We're talking about combating hate and prejudice,
Yeah,
about creating a world where everyone feels safe and respected.
regardless of their faith or background.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered Rosenberg's distortions of history, his attacks on Jewish culture and religion, his dangerous political agenda.
Yes, it's clear that his book was a blueprint for hate, a deliberate attempt to demonize an entire group of people and justify their persecution.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that the ideas that Rosenberg promoted didn't just disappear with the fall of the Nazi regime.
No, they didn't.
They continue to circulate in various forms, finding new life in online spaces, extremist groups, and even in more mainstream political discourse. That's terrifying. So what can we do to counter these dangerous ideologies today?
Well, as we've discussed, education and media literacy are crucial.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the historical context of anti-Semitism, the ways it's been used to justify hate and violence, and the tactics used to spread these ideas.
So knowledge is our first line of defense. But what about when we encounter these ideas in real life? How do we respond effectively?
That's a great question, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
The best response will depend on the specific situation and the people involved.
So it's about being adaptable.
It is.
Using our judgment to determine the most effective course of action.
Exactly. Sometimes a direct confrontation might be appropriate.
Okay.
Calling out the hateful rhetoric and challenging the person's assumptions.
But other times a more subtle approach might be more effective.
Right, like engaging in dialogue, asking questions, and trying to understand the underlying motivations behind the person's beliefs.
Right. It's about meeting people where they are and trying to find that common ground.
It is about appealing to their sense of empathy and compassion.
Sometimes just sharing personal stories or perspectives can help to break down those barriers and challenge prejudiced views.
It can.
So it's not always about winning an argument or changing someone's mind on the spot.
No, it's not.
It's about planting seeds of doubt, encouraging critical thinking, and creating space for empathy and understanding to grow.
You've put it perfectly, and it's important to remember that we're not alone in this fight.
Right.
There are countless organizations and individuals working tirelessly to combat anti-Semitism and promote tolerance.
Yeah, and we can support their efforts, amplify their voices, and contribute to creating a more just and equitable world.
We can.
It's a collective effort.
It is.
We all have a role to play in pushing back against hate and creating a more inclusive and welcoming society.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Rosenberg doesn't just focus on these contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism.
Okay.
He also tries to trace his roots back to ancient times, attempting to establish this idea of a long-standing and inherent Jewish threat.
So he's going for that long game argument.
He is.
Trying to convince people that anti-Semitism isn't a product of specific historical circumstances, but rather something that's been baked into Western civilization from the beginning.
Exactly. He wants to make it seem like an inevitable and justified response to a perennial problem.
So he's constructing this narrative that makes anti-Semitism seem like a natural reaction to an age-old threat.
Yes.
Rather than what it is, a form of prejudice and discrimination with no basis in reality.
Exactly. And he starts by discussing the Jewish diaspora, the dispersion of Jewish people from their ancient homeland.
Right.
He presents this as evidence of their inherent restlessness and desire to infiltrate and control other societies.
It's like he's suggesting that the very act of existing outside of their original homeland is somehow suspicious and threatening.
Yeah, it's his point. He completely ignores the historical context of the diaspora, the fact that Jewish people were often forced to flee persecution and seek refuge in other lands.
He's twisting this tragic history of displacement and resilience into this sinister narrative of deliberate infiltration and subversion.
It's a classic example of how anti-Semitic thinking distorts reality, turning victims into villains.
Yeah, rewriting history to fit a predetermined narrative.
Absolutely.
Okay, but how does he explain events that were clearly harmful to Jewish communities?
Right.
Like expulsions, pogroms, widespread discrimination.
Well, he doesn't ignore them, but he tries to rationalize them.
Okay.
He claims they were necessary responses to Jewish actions, that they were justified acts of self-defense against this supposed Jewish threat.
So he's basically saying they brought it on themselves.
Exactly. It's a classic tactic of blaming the victim.
It's a way to absolve those in power of any responsibility for the suffering they've caused.
Absolutely. He takes this incredibly complex and tragic history and reduces it to a simplistic narrative of good versus evil.
Where Jewish people are always cast as the villains.
Always.
It's so clear that he's not interested in presenting an accurate or objective account of the past.
No, he's not.
He's cherry-picking events, twisting facts, and ignoring context to fit his preconceived notions about Jewish people.
His book is a masterclass in propaganda.
It is.
A prime example of how history can be weaponized to serve a hateful agenda.
And it's a stark reminder that we can't just passively accept the narratives we're given.
We can't. We need to be critical thinkers.
Right.
Questioning sources and seeking out multiple perspectives.
So even though Rosenberg's book is filled with lies and distortions,
Yes.
it can actually be a valuable tool for understanding how propaganda works.
It It's like a case study in the techniques used to manipulate people and justify hate.
By analyzing his arguments,
Right.
we can learn to identify similar patterns of thought in other contexts.
Exactly.
Whether it's in political discourse, online forums, or even just casual conversations.
It's about recognizing those subtle ways that prejudice can manifest.
Right. How seemingly innocuous stereotypes and generalizations can be used to justify discrimination and violence.
You've hit the nail on the head.
So it's not just about debunking lies.
No, it's not.
It's about addressing the underlying emotional and psychological factors that make people susceptible to these kinds of narratives.
You're absolutely right. Combating prejudice requires more than just presenting facts.
Right.
It requires empathy, understanding, and a willingness to engage in difficult conversations.
It's a challenging task.
It is.
But one that's absolutely essential if we want to create a more just and equitable world.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it really highlights the importance of being aware of the language we use and the images we evoke when we talk about other cultures and religions.
Yeah, even seemingly innocuous descriptions can be used to reinforce prejudice and stereotypes.
Absolutely. Yeah. We need to be mindful of the power of words and images to shape our perceptions and attitudes towards others.
So even though Rosenberg's book is filled with hate, it can teach us some valuable lessons about these subtle ways that prejudice can manifest and the importance of critical thinking and empathy.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've talked about this tactic of using disgust to dehumanize, but Rosenberg also makes some pretty bold claims about the historical trajectory of Jewish influence.
He does. He attempts to trace what he sees as this pattern of Jewish influence back to ancient times. Trying to establish this idea that the so-called Jewish threat isn't something new, but has been lurking in the shadows for centuries.
So he's trying to make anti-Semitism seem like a natural reaction to this age-old threat.
Like it's inevitable. A justified response to a perennial problem.
Rather than what it is, a form of prejudice and discrimination with no basis in reality.
Exactly. And he starts by focusing on the Jewish diaspora. The dispersion of Jewish people from their ancient homeland. And he presents this as evidence of their inherent restlessness and their desire to infiltrate and control other societies.
So it's almost like he's suggesting that the very act of existing outside of their original homeland is somehow suspicious and threatening.
That's exactly his point. He completely ignores the historical context of the diaspora. The fact that Jewish people were often forced to flee persecution and seek refuge in other lands. He twists this history of displacement and resilience into a sinister narrative of intentional infiltration and subversion.
It's just incredible how he manages to flip the script.
I know.
And make the victims of persecution look like the aggressors.
It's classic anti-Semitic thinking.
But how does he explain events that were clearly harmful to Jewish communities? Like expulsions, pogroms, or widespread discrimination?
He tries to rationalize these atrocities. Claiming that they were necessary responses to Jewish actions, justified acts of self-defense against this supposed Jewish threat.
It's a classic case of blaming the victim.
It is a way of absolving those in power of any responsibility for the suffering they've caused.
He takes this incredibly complex and tragic history. And he reduces it to this simplistic narrative of good versus evil. Where Jewish people are always cast as the villains. It's clear that he's not interested in presenting an accurate or objective account of the past.
He's not. He's just trying to reinforce existing prejudices and justify his hateful ideology.
His book is a textbook example of propaganda.
It's a prime example of how history can be weaponized to serve a hateful agenda.
It's a stark reminder that we can't just passively accept the narratives we're given.
We can't. We need to be critical consumers of historical narratives. We need to question sources, consider different perspectives, and be aware of the potential for bias and manipulation.
Developing a critical eye for historical narratives is crucial in combating all forms of prejudice and discrimination.
Absolutely.
History is not simply a collection of facts. It's a story that's constantly being rewritten and reinterpreted.
That's right.
We need to be aware of who is telling the story and what their motivations might be.
Couldn't agree more.
Like we've been saying throughout this whole deep dive, knowledge is power.
It is.
Understanding the mechanisms of propaganda, the ways that history can be distorted, the subtle ways that prejudice can manifest, that's how we can effectively challenge these harmful ideologies.
You've put it perfectly. It's about empowering ourselves to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives that we're presented with, and to advocate for a more just and equitable world.
This deep dive has been a sobering experience.
It has.
But I feel like it's also been incredibly valuable.
I agree.
It's like we've unearthed a hidden history, exposing the roots of this dangerous ideology that continues to plague our world.
Rosenberg's book is a chilling reminder of the power of ideas to shape our perceptions, influence our behavior, and ultimately to cause immense harm.
But it's also a call to action.
It is.
It's a reminder that we can't just sit back and let these hateful ideologies go unchallenged.
Oh, it can't.
We have a responsibility to speak out against injustice, to educate ourselves and others, and to work towards creating a world where everyone feels safe and respected, regardless of their faith or background.
That's a vision worth striving for, and I believe that by understanding the past, by confronting these difficult truths, we can create a brighter future for all.
Thank you for guiding me through this challenging material. It's been a truly eye-opening experience, and I feel better equipped to recognize and challenge anti-Semitism in all its forms.
It's been my pleasure, and remember, the fight against hate is a collective effort. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. This has been a deep dive into the dark world of anti-Semitism, as seen through the lens of Alfred Rosenberg's The Track of the Jew Through the Ages. We've unpacked his twisted logic, his dangerous rhetoric, and the lasting impact of his hateful ideology. Let this be a reminder to always question the narratives we're given, to challenge prejudice wherever we encounter it, and to strive for a world where all people are treated with dignity and respect.